Alan Granger thought he had the perfect marriage until the night he caught his wife Jenna in bed with not one, but three different men, and one of them was a police officer. What began as betrayal quickly spiraled into a deadly web of lies, murder, and a town-wide conspiracy that forced Alan to choose between silence and survival. Alan Granger wasn't the kind of man who sought trouble. He worked hard as an HVAC technician, clocked in early, came home before sunset, and helped his two kids with their homework. His wife Jenna was the kind of woman people notice: bright smile, always dressed neatly, and quick with friendly small talk. On the outside, their life appeared calm and routine. They lived in a quiet suburb just outside Tampa, Florida, in a modest house painted sky blue with a small vegetable garden in the backyard. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches, where kids rode bikes on the street, and where Alan believed nothing sinister could ever happen. But it started with the smallest things. Alan began noticing subtle shifts in Jenna's behavior. She started staying out later, sometimes claiming work emergencies or errands that didn't quite make sense. She took sudden interest in her appearance, which, while flattering at first, quickly began to raise flags. Expensive perfume, newly colored hair, and workouts she never used to care about became part of her weekly routine. Her phone, which once sat idly on countertops or couches, was now always in her hand, screen tilted away from view. She began stepping into other rooms to answer texts, and her laughter, once genuine, felt forced. It was a Tuesday when Alan decided to act. He wasn't suspicious out of jealousy, but because of the growing distance. Every day Jenna seemed more detached, floating through family dinners like she was somewhere else. Alan told himself he might be overthinking things, but part of him needed certainty. That afternoon, while Jenna was still at work and the kids were at school, Alan climbed into the attic and quietly drilled a tiny hole into the ceiling above their bedroom. Into it, he installed a hidden micro camera, one designed for home security but small enough to go unnoticed. It linked wirelessly to a private app only he could access. He buried the wires in insulation and resealed the drywall to cover any trace. For the next 3 days, nothing happened. Jenna came home, cooked dinner, bathed the kids, and sat on the couch as if everything was normal. Alan almost felt guilty for spying. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe the spark had just dimmed over time, and there was nothing sinister at all. But on Thursday afternoon, everything changed. At 3:12 p.m., while Alan was reviewing footage during his lunch break at work, he saw Jenna enter the bedroom with a man. Alan froze. The man was young, probably in his 20s, with a slim build and a sleeve of tattoos on his left arm. He wore a backwards cap and seemed familiar with the house, walking in like he'd been there before. Jenna closed the door behind them. What followed made Alan's heart sink. There was no doubt in what he saw. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't innocent. Alan couldn't move for several minutes, just watching the screen like his entire world had tilted sideways. The next day, he checked again. Jenna came home at nearly the same time. This time, it was a different man. Clean-cut, dressed like a corporate executive, maybe in his mid-40s. He had a briefcase and a wedding ring. Jenna let him in with a familiar smile. Alan sat in stunned silence as the footage played out again. Same routine, same betrayal, different man. On Saturday, Alan watched once more, his stomach tight with dread. Jenna entered the house around 3:10 p.m. First came the tattooed man from Thursday, then the businessman from Friday. Alan could barely process it. But just when he thought it couldn't get worse, a third man arrived. This one was different: taller, broader, darker skin, and he walked in like he belonged there. Jenna welcomed him with the same ease. All three men were greeted warmly. Then they all entered the bedroom together. Alan watched the footage without blinking, without breathing. It was real. It was happening in his own house. Jenna wasn't just cheating, she was meeting multiple men, and they all knew about each other. Alan couldn't understand how long this had been going on, or why, or what it meant for his family. He felt like a ghost standing outside his own life. He spent that entire night walking around the house, checking every room, every lock, every camera feed. Jenna slept peacefully, unaware of what Alan now knew. Their kids were fast asleep down the hall, their innocence untouched by the storm brewing inside their home. Alan stood in the garage, holding the USB drive where he'd copied all the footage. He stared at it for a long time, wondering what to do next. Should he confront Jenna? Should he call the police? What would he even say? That he saw his wife with 3 different men? That she'd turned their bedroom into a revolving door of strangers. Instead of confronting her, Alan made a plan. He would wait, gather more evidence, and try to understand the full picture. His instincts told him there was something more to this, something darker than just infidelity. He remembered the way the third man looked around the hallway, as if checking for cameras or listening devices. It didn't feel like a casual visit. It felt calculated. Alan didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the footage again, taking notes on timestamps, clothing details. Every angle of betrayal burned into his memory. At one point, Jenna came into the kitchen to get water. She didn't notice the haunted look in his eyes. She just sipped and went back to bed. By morning, Alan had reached a conclusion. This wasn't just about broken vows. This was something organized, systematic. 3 different men, 3 different appearances, and Jenna acting like this was routine. Alan realized he had to play a long game. If Jenna could keep secrets, so could he. From that point on, every smile he gave her was fake. Every dinner they shared was a performance. But behind the mask, Alan was watching, waiting, and silently preparing for whatever truth came next. Alan's sense of time began to warp after what he'd seen. Days moved slowly, every minute thick with tension. He still went to work, still came home in time for dinner, still helped his kids brush their teeth and tuck them in. But every action was hollow. His mind stayed in one place: the footage, the faces, the questions. He replayed each video like a detective examining a crime scene. He noted the exact times the men entered, how they moved, how long they stayed. Something about the third man, the one who came last, kept pulling at Alan's thoughts. There was something about his body language, the way he scanned the hallway and hesitated near the bedroom door. It wasn't casual. It was cautious. On Sunday morning, Alan left the house early. He drove back to the motel where he had seen Jenna meet the tattooed man Brandon, based on the name she'd murmured in a voicemail Alan had secretly recovered. The building was run down, its sign flickering half-lit even in daylight. A few old sedans were parked in the lot. It looked like the kind of place that barely kept its doors open. Alan went inside and waited for the receptionist to return from the back. He slipped her a folded $100 bill and calmly asked about a certain room number 1 Jenna had entered 2 days earlier. Money did the talking. She scrolled through a physical check-in book, ran a finger down the names, and pointed to one, Brandon Clark. Back home, Alan sat in the garage with his laptop open. He searched Brandon Clark's name and found an arrest record from 5 years prior: assault, resisting arrest, and suspected gang activity, though the charges had been dropped. The mugshot showed the same tattoos Alan had seen on the video. His connection to Jenna was now undeniable, but the picture was still incomplete. Jenna didn't seem like someone who would fall into that world by accident. If Brandon had a criminal past, why was he coming and going from Alan's home without caution? Later that day, Alan took a different route and parked near the motel's dumpsters. He didn't know what he was looking for, just that something was off. The ground was littered with broken bottles and cigarette butts. As he scanned the area, a glint of metal caught his eye near a torn garbage bag. He moved closer and found a wallet battered, dirty, and half buried in leaves. Inside was a driver's license. Alan's breath caught when he saw the photo. It was the third man from Saturday. Name: Marcus Sorrell. Alan flipped through the contents: 27 in cash, a business card from a property firm, and 2 faded receipts. But no credit cards, no phone. The wallet had clearly been discarded, not lost. That unsettled him more than anything else. Alan turned the wallet in at a local police station anonymously, claiming he'd found it near a dumpster. He left before anyone could ask more questions. He didn't want his name tied to anything yet. Something about this man Marcus felt like a missing piece to whatever was spiraling beneath the surface. 3 days passed without incident. Jenna acted normal, as if the prior weekend had never happened. She kissed him goodnight, checked on the kids, and scrolled through her phone with a smile that looked more practiced than genuine. Alan played along, but never stopped watching. Then came the news that shattered his breath. It was Thursday morning. Alan was drinking his coffee when the headline flashed on the screen of his phone. A body had been discovered in a marsh just outside town. A man in his early 40s. No ID found. Police believed it was foul play. Cause of death: blunt force trauma. The article included a blurry photo taken by a passerby of the recovery scene. A detective stood in the background, holding a small plastic evidence bag. Alan's stomach twisted. He didn't need confirmation. He already knew it was Marcus. Everything shifted in that moment. What started as suspicion had now crossed into a full-blown crime. A man who had entered Alan's house was now dead. His wallet had been found at the same motel Jenna used. Alan had the last known footage of him alive on a USB drive, locked in a drawer in the garage. He was no longer just a betrayed husband. He was sitting on evidence. Alan began to question every moment from the past month. What did Jenna know? Was she involved? Or had she simply been caught in something bigger? He couldn't tell. But one thing was certain: if he moved too fast, he could end up like Marcus. He started documenting everything. He bought a notebook and began a timeline. When Jenna left, where she went, who she met. He backed up the video footage to 2 separate external drives and stored them in different places, one in the basement under insulation panels, the other inside the casing of an old stereo no one used. Alan considered turning everything over to the police, but fear held him back. If Jenna was connected to Brandon, and Brandon had ties to gangs, there was no telling how far the reach extended. What if someone inside law enforcement was protecting them? What if reporting the footage meant exposing himself to people who had already killed once? Alan realized he needed to understand the full picture before making a move. He couldn't rush. The stakes were too high. So he returned to the motel, this time asking about Marcus directly. The receptionist didn't know the name. Alan pressed, describing the man's build, hair, clothes. She hesitated, then admitted she had seen him come in once with a woman who looked like Jenna. They hadn't checked in officially. She remembered because the man looked nervous, agitated. That sealed it for Alan. Marcus had met Jenna before, possibly more than once, but now he was dead, and Jenna was walking around like nothing had happened. Alan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the back porch, listening to the crickets chirping beneath a pale moon. The quiet was deceptive. In his chest, everything felt loud. His thoughts kept looping back to the moment Jenna led all 3 men into the bedroom. She had orchestrated that afternoon. She had known exactly what she was doing. And now one of them was gone. Alan understood. He was no longer just watching from the shadows. He was entangled in something deep. He had information others might kill for. And he was starting to believe Jenna might be capable of things he had never imagined. Alan's thoughts became more obsessive with each passing hour. He felt like a man buried alive, screaming with no one to hear him. Jenna continued moving through their home like a ghost. Soft smiles, warm dinners, folded laundry. But Alan no longer saw a wife in her. He saw a mask, and behind it, something cold and calculated. The camera footage had changed everything, but Marcus's death had opened a door Alan couldn't close. He sat most nights alone in the garage, combing through files he had saved on an old laptop disconnected from the internet. He zoomed in on the smallest details: license plates, logos on shirts, timestamps. He froze frames and scribbled notes, cross-referencing times and locations Jenna claimed she'd been against what the footage revealed. Nothing matched. Jenna was a walking lie. The motel surveillance Alan had retrieved earlier still lingered in his mind. He needed more. He returned to the front desk and saw the same tired receptionist sitting behind the chip counter. She wasn't surprised to see him. This time, he offered more money to owe in cash for the security feed from the weekend Marcus disappeared. She hesitated longer but eventually gave in, handing over a thumb drive. Alan left without saying a word. Back home, he loaded the footage and fast-forwarded to Saturday. The grainy black and white video showed Jenna arriving at 3:06 p.m. in her SUV. Minutes later, Brandon entered the parking lot on foot. Then came the businessman. Alan didn't know his name yet, but he was the man who'd visited Jenna on Friday. Finally, Marcus arrived at 3:21 p.m., stepping out of a rideshare car and walking inside with his hands in his jacket pockets. All 4 of them entered through the side hallway. Alan fast-forwarded through the feed. Around 5:30 p.m., Brandon left alone, walking briskly and looking over his shoulder. 10 minutes later, the businessman exited, pulling a baseball cap low over his eyes and heading toward a silver sedan. But Marcus never came out. Alan rewound and played the segment again. The front and back entrances were covered. Marcus had entered. He never left. Alan's chest felt tight. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. If Marcus died that day, this footage was likely the last public record of his movement, and Jenna was in it, leading him into that motel. Alan had suspected something deeper than cheating, but this confirmed it. Jenna wasn't just being unfaithful. She was involved in something that got someone killed. His next step was Brandon. Alan needed to understand who he really was. He dug deeper into his online trail, finding old mugshots, forum rumors, and a few social media posts. Brandon had been arrested for assault during a drug-related incident but released due to lack of witnesses. His name appeared in a Reddit thread linked to a gang operating out of Central Florida. The group was known for moving narcotics and using women to lure in targets either for deals, leverage, or setups. It was a perfect tactic. People didn't suspect suburban wives of being bait. Alan felt sick. Later that week, he followed Jenna. She told him she was going shopping after work, but Alan didn't trust a word anymore. He trailed her at a distance, keeping his headlights off and staying 3 cars behind. She didn't go to a store. She drove to an empty parking lot near a self-storage facility and parked near the edge. Minutes passed. Then Brandon arrived in a black pickup truck. He stepped out, walked over to Jenna's car, and opened her trunk. Alan stayed low in his seat, phone in hand, snapping photos. Brandon shoved a black duffel bag into the trunk, then said something to Jenna through the window. She nodded, and he walked off. Alan waited until they both left. Then, under cover of night, he returned home. Jenna was already inside, acting as though nothing had happened. She greeted him with a casual smile and went back to watching television. Alan waited until she was asleep. Then he grabbed the spare key to her car and went outside. The trunk smelled faintly of plastic and something sharper. Alan opened the duffel bag slowly. Inside were dozens of small packets, white powder, colorful pills, some sealed in tiny glass containers. Alan didn't need to be an expert to know what he was looking at. It was a drug bag. Jenna had transported drugs possibly more than once. It explained everything. The secrecy, the money, the mysterious men, and now the murder. Alan zipped the bag and put everything back exactly how he found it. He couldn't confront her, not yet. He still had no proof strong enough for law enforcement, especially if someone in the system was protecting them. He needed an outside source. The next day, Alan contacted a private investigator through a burner email account. The man, known online as Meyer, had a reputation for handling sensitive cases quietly. Alan didn't use his real name. He paid in cash and gave only the motel footage, the photos of Brandon, and a general outline of events. Meyer agreed to investigate Jenna's movements and Brandon's known associates. It would take a few days. Alan used that time to install more hidden cameras. One went in Jenna's car, tucked near the air vent. Another was placed in the hallway mirror. A third, his most discreet, was hidden in a potted plant near the kitchen. Every camera had cloud sync and backup storage. He didn't trust anything local anymore. His garage had already been broken into once before he remembered the old padlock being slightly bent, but nothing had seemed missing then. Now he wondered if someone had already tried to erase what he had. He didn't know how far this would go, but he knew one thing: Marcus had died after spending time with Jenna and Brandon, and Alan had proof of it all. What he didn't know was who else might be watching. Days later, he received a thick brown envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside were several photographs. One showed Jenna entering a house known to belong to a mid-level drug dealer. Another captured her exchanging something with a man in a suit outside a convenience store. But the last photo stopped Alan's breath cold. It showed Jenna locked in an embrace with a man wearing plainclothes jeans, a black polo, and a badge tucked at his waist. A police officer, smiling. Alan understood now why the investigation hadn't moved forward, why the motel security hadn't raised red flags, why no one questioned Jenna. She had protection, real protection. Alan wasn't dealing with a simple affair anymore. He was circling the edge of something lethal. And as he realized that Jenna's lies were far bigger than he'd imagined, he also knew something else. He was now a threat to them. And threats don't walk away unchallenged. Alan no longer felt like he was living in his own home. Every room seemed contaminated. The bedroom held secrets too dark to ignore. The hallway echoed with the sound of men's footsteps from the footage. And even the kitchen, the place where his children laughed and ate, felt like a crime scene. His wife still acted as if nothing had changed. Jenna went about her day, smiling at the neighbors, texting with fake warmth, helping their daughter with homework, and pressing kisses onto Alan's cheek like nothing had shattered between them. But Alan was done pretending. He just didn't know how to strike without getting destroyed in the process. The photographs sent by the private investigator had confirmed his worst fears. Jenna was involved with a police officer, someone who might be shielding her from legal consequences. Alan wasn't just facing cheaters or criminals anymore. He was standing in the path of something larger, something with layers of protection and influence. That meant going to the police was pointless. The very system that was supposed to protect him might be working against him. Still, he wasn't ready to run. Not yet. Alan doubled down on his surveillance. He upgraded the cameras, syncing them to an encrypted cloud storage he could access remotely. He programmed the cameras to record automatically when motion was detected and kept daily backups hidden in various locations. One in his office at work, one in the wall behind an old outlet, and one mailed to a friend across the state. If anything happened to him, at least some of the evidence would survive. But all that preparation couldn't keep the storm from hitting. It started on a Thursday evening. Alan came home from work and immediately noticed something off. The garage door was slightly ajar, though he had made sure to lock it that morning. Inside, the drawers had been pulled out, and his laptop, the one that contained the raw footage, was smashed on the ground. The backup USB he'd kept hidden in a toolbox was gone. Nothing else had been touched. The intruder came for one thing: the evidence. Alan's blood ran cold. He rushed inside the house, heart hammering, only to find Jenna calmly sitting on the couch, watching a reality show. The kids were playing upstairs. She looked up and greeted him like everything was normal. If she knew what had just happened, she gave no sign. He didn't say a word. Instead, he checked the hallway camera footage from his phone while pretending to scroll social media. What he saw sent chills through him. Earlier that afternoon, 2 men had entered the garage using a key. One was Brandon. The other was the businessman, the same one from the motel video. They were in and out in less than 6 minutes. They didn't touch anything else, didn't speak, didn't hesitate. It was clear they knew exactly what they were looking for. Alan stared at Jenna that night as she folded laundry, her hands calm and her expression soft. He couldn't decide what terrified him more: the fact that she might be involved, or the possibility that she was being used and didn't fully understand what was happening. But deep down, he knew. No one smiles that calmly when their house is under siege unless they're part of the attack. He spent that night locked in his truck, not sleeping, just staring at the dark windows of the house he no longer trusted. The footage from the cloud camera had been preserved. Thankfully, the break-in had only wiped the physical copy. But it was a warning. They knew Alan had seen too much. They weren't ready to kill him yet, but they wanted him to know they could. The next morning, Jenna called the police. Alan hadn't expected it. He was sipping his coffee when a patrol car pulled into the driveway. Jenna answered the door, her voice full of concern as she claimed Alan had been acting paranoid, installing cameras around the house, and threatening her privacy. She showed them text messages Alan didn't remember sending. One officer scrolled through screenshots on her phone, nodding. Jenna had built a case, fabricated or not. It looked convincing. Alan tried to explain. He told the officers he had discovered illegal activity involving Jenna and several men. He mentioned the motel, the camera footage, even Marcus Sorrell's death. But the officers didn't seem interested in his story. One of them pulled him aside and warned him to stop harassing his wife. If he didn't, there would be consequences. Alan was forced to leave his own home that afternoon. He packed a single duffel bag, grabbed his truck keys, and left without a word to Jenna. The kids watched from the living room window, confused and scared. He didn't blame them. The world around them was falling apart, and they had no idea why. Alan drove for hours without a destination. He ended up in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering lights and a paper-thin mattress. He spent the next few days in that room, replaying everything over and over in his mind. He knew Marcus had died. He knew Jenna was connected to Brandon. He had proof of her handling drugs. He had seen 3 men enter his bedroom on camera. He had photos, footage, time logs. And yet none of it mattered. Because now, Jenna controlled the narrative. Alan wasn't done fighting. He uploaded everything he had left to a secure drive and created a detailed document: names, dates, screenshots, photos. Then he contacted a local investigative journalist who ran a small but respected blog focused on corruption and crime. He used a burner email and wrote every detail he could remember, attaching the entire case file. He didn't sign his name. He hit send and waited. 2 days later, the story went live. Local wife linked to motel death and drug ring. It featured stills from the motel camera, blurred faces, and maps of the timeline Alan had provided. The article went viral in hours. The community was stunned. Comments flooded in. The police department made a vague statement that the matter was under internal review. Jenna's face was never shown, and her name never mentioned, but locals pieced it together quickly. Then, without warning, the article vanished. The entire blog disappeared from the internet overnight. The journalist's account went silent. His social media accounts were wiped. When Alan tried to check again, the page read 404 not found. He called the number listed for the journalist, but it was disconnected. Alan stared at his screen in disbelief. He knew then that this wasn't just a suburban affair gone wrong. This was bigger, more dangerous. Someone had erased the truth. Alan packed his things that night and left Florida entirely. The last thing he did before disappearing was upload the footage of that Saturday afternoon, the one where he saw all three men enter the bedroom, to an anonymous cloud account protected by encryption and multiple passwords. He wrote a simple note: "If anything happens to me, this is why." Alan left Florida with no plan, no real destination, and no certainty of what came next. He just knew he couldn't stay. The air in his hometown felt poisoned. Every familiar street was lined with invisible eyes. Every familiar voice felt rehearsed, hollow, or compromised. The system was tainted. The home he once built was now enemy territory. The woman he once loved had destroyed any illusion of safety. So Alan drove west, miles and hours slipping by, until cities blurred into countryside, and then into wilderness. He settled in a remote cabin in Montana, renting it under a false name through a third-party site. It sat near the edge of a forest, with no nearby neighbors and no cell reception. Just the sound of wind cutting through the trees, the crackle of firewood, and the constant hum of fear beneath his skin. He didn't tell anyone where he'd gone. Not friends, not family. He didn't risk social media, banking apps, or emails. Everything that could be tracked was abandoned. He was starting over as a shadow. But even in solitude, Alan couldn't rest. The footage haunted him. He'd seen too much to forget. Jenna and the three men entering the bedroom. Marcus walking into the motel and never walking out. Brandon unloading a bag of drugs into Jenna's car. The police officer in plain clothes wrapped in Jenna's arms. And then the break-in. The deletion of the article. The reporter who vanished. The story had vanished from public view, but Alan remembered every frame. He had the footage saved in a cloud account, secure, hidden, and encrypted with layers of passwords. The account was connected to an automatic release trigger. If Alan didn't check in every 30 days, a series of scheduled emails would go out to journalists, lawyers, and watchdog groups. But even that didn't bring peace. The people behind Marcus's death were powerful. They had already proven they could erase evidence, silence journalists, and manipulate the police. If they found him, they wouldn't hesitate. Still, Alan needed justice, or something like it, so he worked in the shadows. From the cabin, he used burner laptops and public Wi-Fi from a library 2 towns over. He started collecting information again. Jenna's name had quietly dropped out of local mentions. No arrest, no news, no consequences. It was as if she never existed. But Alan didn't believe in vanishing acts that clean. He knew she was still active, just buried deeper, protected better. He started watching for obituaries and missing persons from his old town. That's when he saw a small report buried on a local news site about a man found dead behind an abandoned shopping center. The body had been decomposed, but he'd been identified through dental records. His name, Stephen Meyer, the same private investigator Alan had hired, the one who sent him the photos. The article called it a drug overdose. Alan didn't believe that for a second. That was the final confirmation. Jenna and her circle weren't just running drugs or using charm to manipulate men. They were eliminating threats, one by one. Alan had become a threat too. He spent the next week preparing. He converted his original files into a public format, creating an expose video narrated with text, blurred faces, and time-stamped overlays. It was designed like a documentary, calm, factual, chilling. He uploaded it to 5 different video platforms under anonymous names and scheduled each to publish 90 days apart unless manually stopped. He included every shred of data: camera footage, motel records, Marcus's wallet, Jenna's connections, Brandon's past, the photos with the cop, and the wiped article. It was a digital time bomb. One night, Deep into October, Alan heard something outside. It was past midnight. The forest quiet, no wind. But he caught movement through the cabin window, barely perceptible, like a shadow slipping between trees. His chest tightened. He turned off all lights and grabbed his emergency kit. No panic, just instinct. He watched for nearly 20 minutes. Then he saw it, a man in dark clothing, standing in the tree line, not moving, just watching. Alan didn't wait. He triggered the emergency upload manually and grabbed the burner phone. He called a secure contact from an advocacy group in Oregon, someone who helped whistleblowers disappear. He said one sentence, "It's happening." By the time he packed and left the cabin, he knew the video would go live within 12 hours. And it did. Titled "The Footage He Was Killed For," the video exploded online. Reddit threads lit up, Twitter feeds flooded, true crime forums, dark web archives, and mirror links made the footage impossible to erase. People everywhere watched as a suburban wife led 3 different men into her bedroom. They saw Marcus arrive at the motel and never return. They saw Brandon unloading a bag into Jenna's car. They saw the officer hugging her. They saw dates, times, receipts, and facial recognition matches. Even without full names, it was damning. Too much to ignore. Mainstream news picked up the story, but cautiously. They never named Jenna. No one did officially. But the internet didn't care about names. They wanted truth, and they found it. The local police department issued a statement denying involvement, claiming the footage was edited and out of context, but the timeline matched Marcus's death. The disappearance of the investigator couldn't be explained, and neither could the vanishing of the original journalist. Public pressure mounted. Independent investigations were launched. The state attorney general stepped in. Arrests followed. Not Jenna, not right away. But Brandon was taken into custody after being found crossing state lines with 2 firearms and unmarked pills. More names began to surface. A network was uncovered: low-level trafficking, extortion, police collusion. Marcus, it turned out, had tried to back out of a deal. That's why he was killed. Jenna had lured him to the motel. Brandon had finished the job. The third man, the businessman, vanished soon after the story broke. Some believed he fled the country. Others thought he was silenced too. Jenna finally faced questioning 2 months later. She denied everything, claimed she was being blackmailed, threatened, manipulated. But her phone records told a different story. So did her bank transfers, enough to justify charges. Not murder, but conspiracy and trafficking. The trial became a media circus, but one person never appeared. Alan Granger had vanished. No one knew where he went. The last known trace of him was the upload trigger in a short message left on a forum. Dante let the truth disappear again. Some believe he lives off-grid in Canada. Others think he changed identities completely. But no one knows for sure. The only thing certain is this: he was just a husband, a regular man, until he saw all 3 doing it. And that truth almost killed him.